My brother's engagement party was still happening 2 floors below me when I found the letter. I had slipped upstairs to the guest bathroom for exactly 3 minutes of silence. 3 minutes away from my mother's glowing performance for her future daughter-in-law's family, away from my brother's practiced smile, and his arm draped around his fiancée like a prop he'd rented for the evening. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just tired. But the envelope was sitting on the bathroom counter, half tucked behind the hand towels, addressed to the house but with my name on it, my full legal name. The return address was a commercial lending firm I had never heard of in my life. I opened it. It was a notice of impending litigation, a business loan, $260,000. My name listed as the primary co-signatory. The loan had been in default for 4 months. I read the number 3 times. Then I read my name 3 times. Then I sat down on the edge of the bathtub because my legs stopped working. $260,000. In default, 4 months. 4 months ago, I had been in Portland finishing my clinical fellowship in occupational therapy. I had been working 70-hour weeks, building the last piece of my career, the piece I had sacrificed my entire 20s to build. My license was 2 months from being fully independent, 2 months from the day I could finally practice under my own name, build my own patient roster, stop depending on an institution to sign off on everything I did. 2 months. And someone had used my name to borrow $250,000 from a commercial lender, defaulted on it for 4 months without saying a single word to me, and apparently decided to let me find out about it alone in a bathroom while a party played out downstairs. Have you ever felt the moment something inside you stops being soft? Not anger, not sadness, something quieter and colder than either of those. Something that says, "So this is who they are." Let me know your story in the comments below. I didn't go back downstairs. I sat in that bathroom for 22 minutes, reading the letter 3 more times. Then I washed my face, looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment, and walked out. My mother was in the kitchen replenishing the charcuterie board when I found her. My brother was 15 feet away, laughing with his fiancé's father. I waited until my mother looked up. I held the letter out. I kept my voice completely flat, the same voice I use when I'm telling a patient's family something they don't want to hear. "What is this?" She glanced at it. Just a glance. Then she looked back at the cheese board. "I was going to tell you." "Mom, not tonight, Serena. This is your brother's night. This has my name on it." She set down the tongs and looked at me with that particular expression she reserved for when I was being what she called dramatic. "It's a paperwork situation. We needed a co-signer. You were the only one with a clean enough credit profile. It was temporary." I stared at her. "You forged my signature on a $260,000 loan. Keep your voice down. You forged my signature." She turned back to the board. "We'll talk about it Monday. Not tonight." I folded the letter, I put it in my bag, and I walked out of my mother's house without saying goodbye to anyone. The drive back to my apartment took 40 minutes. I spent the first 20 completely silent, white-knuckling the steering wheel. I spent the last 20 thinking with the kind of clarity that only arrives when everything soft has burned away. By the time I pulled into my parking space, I already knew I wasn't going to call my mother on Monday. I was going to call a lawyer tonight. Her name was Patricia, and she wasn't a general practice attorney. She was the kind of lawyer who specialized in financial fraud and licensing protection. I had met her once at a professional conference 18 months ago and kept her card because she had said something that stuck with me. The biggest mistake professionals make is waiting too long to protect themselves. I found her number in my contacts at 11:30 at night. She answered on the 3rd ring. I apologized for the hour. She told me to skip the apology and explain the situation. I did. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Send me the letter tonight." "All of it." "What's the exposure?" I asked. "For a default of that size attached to your name as co-signatory? If the lender pursues you personally, they can come after your savings, your assets. But the licensing issue is the more serious problem." She paused. "An unresolved financial judgment against a licensed occupational therapist can be flagged to your state board. Depending on the circumstances, it could be classified as a professional conduct violation." I closed my eyes. There it was. "It won't just cost you money," she continued. "It could cost you the license." The license. The thing I had built through 6 years of school, 3 years of clinical work, and 12 months of the most demanding fellowship program in the Pacific Northwest. The thing that was not a job title or a resume line, but the entire architecture of the life I had constructed from scratch. They hadn't just signed my name to a loan. They had picked up my life's work and held it over a fire. "Patricia," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice was, "I want a full credit freeze. I want a forensic review of anything with my name attached, and I want you to tell me exactly how we cut this off before it touches my license. I'll start in the morning, she said. 9 o'clock. Come to my office. I went. Patricia's office was quiet and glass-walled, and smelled like coffee and printed documents, and she had already done more work by 9:15 than I had expected. She laid it out in front of me without softening anything. The loan had been taken out 11 months ago against a restaurant venture, a fast casual concept my brother had been pitching to our mother for 2 years. The restaurant had opened, run for 6 months, and quietly closed. The loan had gone into default 30 days after the closing. My name had been on the co-signatory line from the beginning. The signature was not mine. It's a clean forgery, Patricia said. Whoever did it had access to documents with your real signature. But it's still a forgery. We can prove that. My brother, I said. He had access. He borrowed my car once when I was home for Christmas 3 years ago, and my registration and insurance were in the glove box. He had access to documents. Patricia nodded slowly. I need to look at the originating paperwork. The loan brokerage, the initial application. She turned to her screen. The primary contact listed here is a business entity. Let me trace it. She typed for a minute. Then she stopped. Serena. Her voice changed. Does the name Diane mean anything to you? I went still. My aunt. My father's older sister. She's listed as the business consultant who facilitated the loan introduction. The room did something strange around me. I heard the air conditioning. I heard Patricia's mouse click twice. I heard nothing else. For a long moment. That's not possible, I said. My Aunt Diane left when I was 9 years old. My mother said she embezzled from my father's contracting business. She said Diane stole the accounts and disappeared. We haven't heard from her in over 20 years. Patricia looked at me with a careful, measured expression. The Diane listed in this application has an active business consulting license. She operates a financial advisory firm. She's not hiding from anyone. She turned the screen so I could see it. She also left a contact number. And I think you need to call it. I spent the drive home trying to reconstruct a memory I had never been allowed to question. My Aunt Diane in my mother's telling was a cautionary ghost, the woman who had betrayed my father's trust, stolen the business he'd built, and vanished. My mother had used that story the way other families use folk tales to explain why certain people couldn't be trusted, why outsiders were dangerous, why the family had to stick together no matter what. The story of Diane was the story of what happened when you let someone in. I called the number at 2 in the afternoon. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was not the voice of a woman who had spent 20 years running from anything. It was calm and direct, and when I told her who I was, it went quiet in a way that held something that sounded like grief. I wondered when this would happen, she said. I need to know the truth, I said. About the loan. About you. About what my mother told us. There was a long pause. Can we meet in person? We met at a coffee shop in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon. She was 61 years old, impeccably put together, with my father's eyes in a different face. She sat across from me, and she didn't perform anything. No dramatic entrance, no prepared speech. She just looked at me for a moment and said, "You look like him. You always did." I asked her to start at the beginning. She did. She and my father had built the contracting business together, equal partners. When my father got sick, the illness that eventually took him when I was 12, she had tried to step in and stabilize the company. My mother had been terrified, not of losing the business, but of losing control of it. My mother had been the face of the family, the manager of their social reputation, the one who decided what story got told and to whom. A business run by my father's sister was a business she couldn't control. So before my father died, while he was still sick and not fully coherent, my mother had pushed my aunt out. She had produced documentation my aunt had never signed. She had told the family, told the community, told her children that Diane had stolen everything and run, and she had been telling that story for 22 years. I sat with that for a while. Why didn't you fight it? I finally asked. My aunt wrapped both hands around her cup. I tried, for a while. But your mother is very good at what she does, and I didn't want to be the woman who dragged her dead brother's family through a legal battle while his children were grieving. She looked out the window. I thought I'd wait until you and your brother were adults. I thought eventually you'd find your way to the truth. And the loan? I said. Your name is on the origination documents. She shook her head. I never facilitated any loan. My name and my firm's credentials were used without my consent. Your mother and your brother had access to my professional information through a business filing I was briefly associated with 6 years ago. She met my eyes. Serena, they didn't just forge your signature. They forged my professional credentials to get the loan approved. We are both victims of the same fraud. I drove back to Patricia's office that same afternoon. I sat down in the same glass-walled room, and I laid it all out. My aunt's account, the timeline, the forged credentials, all of it. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "This changes the exposure significantly. If we can prove that a third party's professional license was fraudulently used to originate the loan, this isn't just a forgery case. This is commercial fraud, potentially wire fraud." She pulled up a document on her screen. "And it means your aunt has standing to join the action. She said she's willing to." "Good." Patricia leaned back. "There's something else I found this morning when I was running the asset trace on your mother's accounts." She turned the screen. "Are you familiar with your father's estate?" I shook my head. "My mother handled everything after he died. She always said there wasn't much. The business was gone, the debts were covered, there was a small life insurance payout. There was also a trust," Patricia said. "A modest one, but a trust, established by your father before he died. It was set up to benefit his children." She paused. "Your mother has been drawing from it as the named administrator. She was designated as administrator specifically for the purpose of managing it until you and your brother turned 30. You turned 31 last year." I stared at the screen. "The trust transferred full management rights to you when you reached 30, she said. "Your mother has continued drawing from it as though those rights never transferred. And the trust document contains a protection clause. Any administrator who uses trust assets for purposes that conflict with the named beneficiary's interests can be removed and held liable for the full amount withdrawn during the period of improper management." My father had written a clause into his estate to protect me. 20 years before I would ever need it. While he was sick and running out of time, he had tried to make sure I couldn't be taken from. I pressed my fingertips against the table and breathed very carefully for a moment. "What do we do first?" I asked. "We file," she said. "Tomorrow morning." The injunction hit on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, my mother had called 11 times. I didn't answer. My brother sent a text at 6 in the evening. "Serena, this is insane. Call Mom. She's losing it." I read it and set the phone face down. The silence lasted 5 days. On the 6th day, my mother came to my apartment. I heard the knock and looked through the peephole. She was not dressed the way she dressed for other people. She was in a coat she'd had for 10 years with her hair half done and her eyes red at the edges in a way I'd never seen before. She looked like a person whose infrastructure had stopped working. I opened the door. I kept my hand on the frame. "Baby," she said. Her voice was raw. "Please, you don't understand what this is doing." "I understand exactly what this is doing," I said. "Your brother is devastated. The wedding, Serena, his fiance's family, is already asking questions. This is going to—" "You forged my signature," I said. "You used my credit, my name, and my professional reputation on a loan you knew I would never agree to. And you let it default for 4 months without telling me." She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. The tears came right on schedule. I had seen those tears my entire life. At school meetings, when she wanted something from a teacher. At family gatherings when the attention drifted away from her. They were real tears. They were also completely disconnected from remorse. "I was going to tell you," she said. "I was waiting for the right time. You were so busy, and I didn't want to stress you during the fellowship." "Don't," I said. "I did it for the family, for your brother. You have so much, Serena. You always had it together. You were always fine. We just needed." "You needed an asset," I said. The word came out of somewhere quiet and certain. "And when I wasn't available to sign willingly, you signed for me." Her face moved through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Grief, calculation, then a flicker of the hardness underneath all of it. "You're going to destroy this family over money. You're going to destroy your brother's future, your mother's home, over a loan that would have been nothing to you." "No," I said. She blinked. "No," I said again. It was the first time in my life that word had come out of my mouth aimed at her and landed with full weight behind it. Not the apologetic no, not the "I'll try to help you another way" no. Just no. I reached for the documents Patricia had sent me, and I held them out. "These are your options. They're not mine. The trust protection clause is already activated. The forgery documentation has been filed. The loan has been traced back to the originating signatures. You have choices to make. They don't involve me fixing anything." She stared at the papers. Her hands shook slightly as she took them. She scanned the first page, and I watched the color leave her face as she found the section about the trust. "He set this up," she said softly, almost to herself. "He knew." "Yes," I said. "He did." Something crossed her face then. Not grief exactly. Something more like the look of someone who has been outmaneuvered by a person who is no longer in the room to gloat about it. My father had been dead for 19 years, and he had still, somehow, found a way to put a wall between her and what she wanted to take from me. She stood there for another minute holding the papers. Then she turned and walked down the hall toward the elevator. I closed the door. Not a slam. A quiet, solid click. The kind of sound a lock makes when it finally catches. I went to my phone and opened the building's guest access app. I found her name in the contacts list. I pressed remove. A second later, a notification from the front desk camera. I watched her in the lobby, standing at the elevator panel, pressing the button for my floor. The panel flashed. Access restricted. She pressed it again. Flashed again. She stood there for a long moment looking at the screen like she could override it through sheer will. Then she left. I made tea. I sat by the window. I felt something in my chest loosen that I hadn't known was tight. The hearing was 3 weeks later. My mother and brother came with a lawyer who looked competent but underprepared, which is the worst possible combination in a proceeding like that one. He tried several angles. He argued family misunderstanding. He argued that my mother had believed she had implied consent based on prior financial cooperation. He tried to characterize the forgery as administrative sloppiness rather than deliberate fraud. Patricia is not a dramatic person in a courtroom. She doesn't perform. She presents facts in the same tone you'd use to read a grocery list, which somehow makes the facts land harder. She submitted the loan document alongside a notarized sample of my actual signature. The difference was visible to anyone with eyes. She submitted the forensic bank analysis, showing the loan proceeds had been used to fund the restaurant and to pay off 2 credit cards in my mother's name that had nothing to do with the business. She submitted my aunt's sworn statement detailing the fraudulent use of her professional credentials. And she submitted the trust documentation, my father's original filing, the protection clause, and 22 months of withdrawals made after my 30th birthday. The judge was a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses she kept taking on and off. She read everything quietly. When she looked up, she looked at my mother directly. "I want to be clear about what this court is looking at," she said. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is not administrative error. This is the documented use of a family member's legal identity for financial gain without consent, followed by an extended period of concealment." She set down her glasses. "It is also the improper administration of a deceased person's estate to the detriment of the named beneficiary." She delivered the rulings one at a time. The loan was declared invalid as it pertained to me. My name was to be fully removed from all associated records. The lender was directed to pursue the actual obligated parties. My professional license was safe. The trust was removed from my mother's administration immediately. The full accounting of unauthorized withdrawals, just over $40,000 over 22 months, was to be repaid from her personal assets. The family home was not seized, but a lien was placed on it to secure the repayment obligation. My mother could not sell it, refinance it, or transfer it without first satisfying the judgment. I watched my brother's face when the lien ruling came through. He went pale in a way that had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with the wedding he was planning, the image he was constructing, the future that had just gotten significantly more complicated. My mother sat very still with her hands folded in her lap and her face arranged in an expression I couldn't read, which was new. Usually I could read every expression she had. It was over. Not cleanly, not painlessly, but it was over. My aunt was waiting in the hall outside the courtroom. She didn't say anything when I walked out. She just looked at me for a moment. Then she held out a small envelope. Inside was a key and a handwritten note. The note was short. "Your father kept a storage unit. He told me to make sure you got it when the time was right. I think the time is right." The storage unit was 20 minutes away in a facility off the highway. The key was old, the kind with a square head. I went that same evening, alone, in the low golden light of a late afternoon in October. The unit was small and climate-controlled. Inside, 12 boxes of my father's business documents, his engineering drawings, his project portfolios. And in the last box, a letter addressed to me in his handwriting. I sat on the concrete floor and read it. It was not a long letter. It was the kind of letter a person writes when they know they are running out of time and they want to make sure the most important thing gets through. He told me he had seen, even then, which way the wind was blowing. He told me the storage unit was proof of work he was proud of, work that had been taken from the record but not from existence. He told me that whatever story I had been told about where his life's work went, the truth was here, in these boxes, available to me whenever I needed it. He told me to build something of my own, not for anyone else's approval, not as a contribution to someone else's performance. Something mine, with my name on it, that no one else could sign. I folded the letter and put it in my bag. I sat there in the quiet of that storage unit for a long time, listening to the hum of the climate control and the faint sound of traffic outside, feeling the particular stillness of a chapter that has genuinely ended. That night, I was back in my apartment. The city lights came through the window in long amber lines across the floor. I opened my laptop, went to the folder where I had saved every document from the last 2 months, the default notice, the court filings, the forensic reports, the letter from my father. I looked at all of it for a long moment. Then I selected the folder and moved it to an external drive I locked in my desk drawer. Not deleted, documented. There is a difference between letting go and forgetting, and I have learned by now to know which one I'm doing. I made myself dinner. I called my aunt and we talked for an hour about my father, about what he had been like before I was old enough to really know him, about the business they had built together. She told me she had kept copies of all his original project files as well, that if I ever wanted to understand where I came from, the real version, not the edited one, she had the documents to show me. I told her I wanted to see them. I am 32 years old. I have a professional license that is intact, a father's legacy that has been partially restored to the record, and a very good forensic attorney on speed dial. I also have a family that is significantly smaller than the one I grew up believing I had. That part is not clean. It is not the ending anyone tells you to want, but there is a kind of freedom in a smaller, true thing that a larger, false thing can never give you. I have spent most of my adult life believing that loyalty meant absorbing damage quietly, that love meant paying and paying and paying until the account was empty and then finding a way to refill it. That being the capable one in a family meant the capable one got to carry the weight of everyone who chose not to be. I believe this not because anyone told me directly, but because it was the water I swam in. It was so constant I forgot it was wet. What I know now is that what I thought was devotion was actually overhead. What I thought was family was actually a structure that required one load-bearing wall me to hold up everything else. And load-bearing walls don't get credit. They just get weight. Removing myself from that structure didn't collapse anyone. They found other ways to stand, or they didn't, and neither outcome was my responsibility. The only thing that collapsed was the version of me that had believed it was. If you have ever been the one everyone calls first, the one who fixes it, the one who pays and absorbs and stays calm while everything around you burns, if you have ever felt the specific exhaustion of being the person a family treats as a utility instead of a person, I want you to hear this. Your competence is not a debt you owe anyone. Your capability is not an asset they are entitled to liquidate. The fact that you can handle it does not mean you are required to. And the day you decide to stop handling what is not yours to carry is not an act of abandonment. It is an act of finally, at last, deciding that you matter too. Thank you for being here and listening to this story. If any part of it hit close to home, I want to hear about it in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you felt that particular sense of release at the end, the one, hit that like button. I'll see you in the next one.